Okay, so you're here because you want to understand something important, right? Get right to the heart of it without wading through mountains of information. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to take a look at a pretty fascinating and, to be honest, kind of concerning aspect of AI security. We're going to be looking at how shockingly simple tricks can actually fool those incredibly smart vision language models. The ones that can look at a picture and tell you all about it, answer questions,
Okay.
even reason about what they see.
Yeah, these large vision language models, or LVLMs as they're often called, are getting really, really capable these days. I mean, think about what's powering some of the most advanced AI tools we have now, right? The ones that can take an image and just generate these incredibly detailed captions, answer complex questions about what's in the picture, even like perform visual reasoning tasks. And, their use in commercial applications is just exploding right now.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. Oh, but as we've seen with a lot of things in AI, great power can come with potential downsides. And in this case, we're talking about adversarial attacks. These are basically clever ways to subtly change images and trick these models into misinterpreting them, which can lead to, wrong or even misleading outputs, sometimes even harmful ones. And get this, today we're diving into a brand new technique that researchers have come up with. And you won't believe how simple it is. It's really effective at fooling these incredibly robust commercial LVLMs. We're talking success rates of over 90% against things like GPT 4.5, GPT-4o, and o1.
90%, yeah, that's a huge number. And our insights today are coming from a research paper titled A Frustratingly Simple Yet Highly Effective Attack Baseline, Over 90% Success Rate Against the Strong Black Box Models of GPT 4.54001. So basically what we want to do today is to really understand how this new attack works, what makes it so effective, and what it reveals about the potential vulnerabilities in these, cutting-edge AI systems.
So the first thing that might come to mind is, uh, haven't researchers been trying to find ways to trick these AI models for a while now? And the answer is definitely yes. But as it turns out, those older methods, especially these things called transfer-based attacks, often don't work against these top-tier commercial LVLMs.
Yeah, exactly. The idea behind transfer-based attacks is to basically you create a manipulated image that can fool one AI model. Let's call that a practice model, one that researchers have full access to. And the hope is that the same tweaked image will also fool a different, more complex black box model. This would be one where, the inner workings are hidden. But what this new research really highlights is that these traditional transfer attacks are largely ineffective against the really cutting-edge models like GPT-4o and Gemini.
So why is that? What are these older attacks doing that isn't working anymore?
Well, the analysis of why these attacks fail is actually quite insightful. It seems that the adversarial perturbations, those tiny changes you make to the original image, tend to be very uniform and they lack specific semantic meaning. You can almost imagine like adding a really faint, almost invisible static across the entire picture.
Got it. So the changes are there, but they're not really targeted at anything specific in the image content.
Precisely. And because these advanced commercial LVLMs are so good at understanding what's actually in an image, the semantic meaning, they just kind of ignore these vague, non-specific changes. Or even worse, they can misinterpret them in ways that the attacker never intended.
And I think a paper gave some pretty telling examples of this. Like one image was manipulated to look like a certain thing, but the LVLM just described it as green apples, green produce, or green cabbages. So it's picking up on like a general feature like color, maybe, or broad category, but it's missing that specific target the attacker was aiming for. So it seems like to fool these models, you can't just add random noise. You need to be way more targeted.
Exactly. It really points to this critical understanding. To successfully attack these models, you need to go beyond just tweaking pixels. You need to target the core semantic elements within the image, the actual objects, and how they relate to one another. Broad, undifferentiated changes just aren't going to do it.
Okay. So the old methods aren't working. What's different about this M attack? How are they focusing on meaning in the image in a way that actually fools these robust models?
The M attack basically introduces a more sophisticated way of generating these adversarial changes. The core idea is to encode very specific semantic details within small, localized areas of the image. So instead of making tiny alterations everywhere, they're concentrating those modifications on the parts of the image that carry the most semantic weight, the objects themselves.
So it's much more targeted and specific. How do they actually manage to embed these very specific details into these local regions?
The key technique involves kind of a clever iterative process. Each step of optimizing the attack, the algorithm takes the image that's being modified and it randomly crops out a small portion of it. But it still keeps control of the crop's shape and size. Then, this cropped section is resized back to the original dimensions. Now, here's the crucial part. This cropped and resized version of the attacked image is then compared to the target image, the one they want the LVLM to see. And it compares them in the embedding space of some other AI models, those practice or surrogate models we talked about before. And you can think of the embedding space as a kind of map where images with similar content are located near each other. So the attack essentially tries to nudge the cropped part of the original image closer to the target image, or even a cropped part of it on this map.
Okay. I'm starting to get the picture here. So they're taking a small piece of the image,
Yeah.
changing it a little bit so that these practice AIs see it as more similar to the target image or a piece of it, and then they're putting it back into the larger picture.
Yeah, that's the core idea. And there's a diagram in the paper, Figure 2, that illustrates this framework. It highlights these two main components, local matching, or LM, and model ensemble, ENS. And the local matching part is really the engine of this approach. By repeatedly cropping different local regions and aligning them with the target in this embedding space, it refines the semantic clarity of the changes that it's making. It's almost like focusing on the fine details piece by piece to slowly shift the overall perception.
And the model ensemble, that's using multiple of these practice AI models, right?
Right.
Why is that important? Why have more than one?
Right. The model ensemble, or ENS, is really crucial for improving the what they call the transferability of the attack. Think of it like this. You're getting multiple expert opinions on what the key elements of an image are. If one expert focuses on broad shapes and another one focuses on fine textures, by combining those insights, you can get a much better picture of what's important. In the same way, by using a collection of different surrogate models, the attack avoids becoming too specialized to the quirks of any one model. It learns to create changes that are much more likely to fool a wider range of unseen models, including those super robust commercial ones.
So the cropping and the local matching make those changes meaningful. They target specific parts of the image. And the ensemble makes those changes more universally effective, so they work across different systems. But why does focusing on these local regions work so well in terms of manipulating the overall semantic understanding?
That actually relates to this interesting idea they touch on, which is this sort of many-to-many or one-to-many mapping idea for semantic detail extraction. So basically, by focusing on local regions, the attack aims to make those specific parts of the original image semantically similar to either corresponding parts of the target image or even the entirety of the target image. And the idea is that it's not just about making the whole image look like the target image, because these sophisticated models can often detect that as unusual, right? Instead, it's about subtly shifting the meaning within particular areas.
So instead of trying to make a whole apple look like a banana, they might try to subtly alter the texture or shape of just part of the apple to trigger that banana recognition in that specific area.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And this local approach also helps to maintain a certain degree of consistency in the changes, right? Because there's some overlap between those cropped regions in each step of the attack. And what that does is it prevents the modifications from being too scattered or nonsensical across the entire image. It's like this balancing act. You want to inject rich semantic information, but you also want to make sure that the changes still make sense within the overall visual context. And the paper mentions this in Figure 4, where they show that simply trying to make the entire original and target images similar in some kind of abstract feature space just doesn't really work for transferability. You really need those targeted local changes. And Figure 3 actually illustrates how the random cropping itself plays a vital role in this balance. The overlapping regions across different steps help ensure that the changes are somewhat coherent, while the new non-overlapping areas in each crop introduce diversity, and that allows the attack to explore different ways to subtly encode the target semantics.
Let's dig into this model ensemble a bit more. You mentioned they use different types of CLIP models. Can you tell us a bit more about those specific models and why they chose that combination?
Sure. They used an ensemble of 3 different variations of CLIP, which is a well-known model for learning visual concepts from text descriptions. The specific ones they used were VITB16, VITB32, and VITG14 LAN 2BS12B42K. And the key takeaway here is that these models all have slightly different underlying architectures, and they were trained on different datasets, which gives them slightly different ways of seeing and interpreting images. So for example, the B16 and B32 refer to different sizes of the patches they use when they analyze an image. This influences the level of detail they focus on. The G14 variant is a much larger model that was trained on this massive dataset.
Okay, so it's like a diverse set of practice AI models with different visual processing strengths. How does this diversity lead to a more effective attack on the black box models?
The diversity of the ensemble helps in a couple of key ways. First, by combining the perspectives of these different models, the attack is much more likely to identify and exploit those fundamental semantic features that are shared across a lot of different AI systems. These are like the underlying visual cues that are more likely to transfer and fool those unseen commercial LVLMs. Second, these different models also have different what we call perception fields. Some are better at picking up fine, detailed changes, while others are better at understanding the overall structure and context of the image. And figure 6 in the paper actually illustrates this pretty well. It shows how the ensemble integrates those complementary strengths to create more robust and transferable perturbations.
So it's like having a team of specialists, each with their own way of analyzing an image, and the attack is using that combined knowledge to find the most effective way to trick a new, unfamiliar AI. Okay, so how do the researchers actually measure if this M attack is successful against these black box models? They can't just look inside and see what they're thinking, right?
Yeah, that's a crucial challenge when evaluating these kinds of attacks against these models, especially when they are proprietary models. In this case, the researchers used two main approaches to measure the success of their M attack. One was a new, more objective metric they developed called the keyword matching rate, or KMR score. The other was the attack success rate, or ASR, based on how semantically similar the description of the attacked image is to the target image description. And that similarity is actually judged by another large language model.
Tell me more about this KMR score. It sounds like it's designed to get around some of the limitations of older ways of evaluating these attacks.
Exactly. Traditionally, researchers have often relied on human judgment to decide if an AI's description of a manipulated image actually matched what the attacker intended. But of course, that can be pretty subjective. The KMR score offers a more quantitative measure. So what they did was, for each target image, they manually identified a set of core semantic keywords. For example, if the target image was a cat riding a bicycle, the keywords might be cat, riding, and bicycle. Then they defined 3 different levels of success based on how many of those keywords actually appeared in the description generated by the black box LVLM when it was shown the attacked image. So there's KMRA, which means at least one keyword matched, KMRB, which means more than half matched, and KMRC, which means all of the keywords matched. And to make this even more objective, they used GPT-4 itself to automatically match those keywords against the LVLM's descriptions with a human review of a subset to ensure accuracy.
That sounds like a much more rigorous, less biased way to really assess whether the attack has actually shifted the AI's understanding of what's in the image. Yeah, what about the attack success rate, the one that uses GPT score?
So for the ASR, they actually used what they call a large language model as a judge approach. First, they had the same commercial LVLM generate captions for both the original unattacked image and the attacked or perturbed image. Then they used GPT score, which is another metric that's powered by a large language model, to measure how semantically similar those two generated captions were. If the similarity score exceeded a certain threshold, in this case it was 0.3, the attack was considered successful. So it's another automated way to kind of determine if the attack has meaningfully altered the LVLM's interpretation of the image.
So with these more objective ways of measuring success, what did the experiments actually show? How did this M attack perform compared to other methods?
The results were really remarkable. Table 2 in the paper clearly shows that M attack significantly outperformed all of the other state-of-the-art attack methods they compared against. This included Attack VLM, SSA CWA, Any Attack, and ADVI-Diff VLM, and it outperformed them across all the major commercial LVLMs that were tested: GPT-4o, Gemini 2.0, and Claude 3.5.
We're talking about a big difference in performance, right? You mentioned success rates over 90% on some of the most advanced models, things like GPT 4.5, 4.0, and zero 01. That's a big jump.
It's a very significant improvement, and those KMR score results really further emphasize this, right? M-Attack achieved the highest keyword matching rates, especially at the stricter KMRB and KMRC thresholds. What that indicates is that not only was the attack more successful in fooling the LVLMs, but it was also much better at actually getting the models to describe the image in a way that aligned with the intended target semantics. The other methods often really struggled to even get a majority of the keywords to match. Interestingly, they also found that M-Attack actually achieved those high success rates while making smaller, less noticeable changes to the image. This was measured by metrics like the EO1 and O2 norms.
So not only is it better at fooling the AI, it's also harder to detect that the image has been tampered with. The researchers also did what are called ablation studies to figure out which components of M-Attack are most important for its effectiveness. What did they find out when they started taking parts of it away?
The ablation studies actually gave them some really valuable insights into why M-Attack is so effective. Figure 10 in the paper shows that the local level matching, that cropping and aligning process, is the single most important factor driving the effectiveness. When they try to perform the matching at a global level without focusing on local details, the attack basically failed. So this really underscores the importance of targeting those specific semantic elements within the image. Figure 9 highlights the really critical role of the model ensemble. When they took away that ensemble and relied on just a single surrogate model, the performance dropped quite a bit. This really demonstrates the benefit of combining those perspectives from multiple models. They also experimented with different sizes for those cropped regions, as shown in Table 8. And what they found was there's like a sweet spot. The crops have to be small enough to focus on local semantics, but they also have to be big enough to maintain some context. And as you might expect, Table 3 shows that the amount of change they were allowed to make to the image, the perturbation budget, does affect the trade-off between how noticeable the changes are and how successful the attack is. But M-Attack consistently outperformed the other methods across different levels of allowed change. Finally, Figure 8 indicated that M-Attack can actually achieve strong performance even with fewer computational steps, suggesting it's also a relatively efficient method.
So the power of M-Attack really comes from that combination, the local semantic targeting and the diverse ensemble of practice AI models. It's amazing how those two things work together to create such an effective attack. The paper also looked at how well M-Attack works against models that are specifically designed for reasoning, and the latest generation of these LVLMs. What were the key findings there?
Yeah, they actually tested M-Attack against those models that are designed for tasks requiring reasoning, like GPT-01, Claude 3.7 Thinking, and Gemini 2.0 Flash Thinking Exp, as well as some of the newest models like GPT 4.5 and Claude 3.7 Sonnet. And the results, which are shown in tables 4 and 5, were pretty interesting, maybe a little surprising. These more sophisticated models, including the ones with enhanced reasoning capabilities, actually showed similar or even slightly weaker robustness to these kinds of visual attacks compared to their non-reasoning counterparts. And the researchers suggest that this might be because the reasoning abilities of these models primarily rely on their text processing components, while the visual processing components, which are the target of these image-based attacks, might be quite similar between the different versions of those models.
So it may be a bit concerning that these more advanced models aren't necessarily harder to fool. Finally, the paper provides some visual evidence of M-Attack in action, right? It's one thing to see the numbers, but it's another thing to actually see the manipulated images and how the AI responds.
For sure. Figure 7 actually provides a side-by-side visual comparison of the manipulated images generated by M-Attack and some of the other attack methods. What's really striking is that the changes made by M-Attack are often much less apparent to the human eye, and the image still looks semantically coherent, whereas the changes made by the other methods can be pretty noticeable. And the images often look kind of strange or nonsensical. Figures 14, 15, and 16 are super interesting because they actually show real-world examples of successful attacks against commercial LVLMs. These are screenshots of chat interfaces where the researchers fed the attacked images to models like GPT-4o, Claude 3.5, and Gemini 2.0. And in those examples, the model responses clearly align with the target semantics, which is pretty wild. I think seeing those concrete examples really brings home the potential vulnerability of these systems.
Yeah, I mean, seeing those real examples makes it much more tangible.
Yeah.
So to wrap up our deep dive here, what's the most important thing we should take away from this research on M-Attack?
I think the key takeaway is that this research has really demonstrated a surprisingly simple, yet remarkably effective method for attacking even the most advanced commercial vision language models. And they do this by cleverly focusing on manipulating those local semantic details within an image, and also by leveraging the collective intelligence of an ensemble of different practice AI models. And by doing this, they've achieved these really unprecedented success rates in fooling these systems.
And what does that say about the bigger picture of AI security and the future of these powerful models?
Well, the success of M-Attack really highlights the ongoing challenges in ensuring the security and robustness of AI systems, especially those that integrate different types of information like images and text. It shows us that even these incredibly sophisticated models can be vulnerable to really carefully designed, seemingly subtle manipulations of their input data. And this is especially important as these models become increasingly integrated into real-world applications where incorrect or manipulated outputs could have significant consequences.
So it's a reminder that as we build more powerful AI, we need to be just as focused on understanding their weaknesses. and think beyond overall accuracy and consider these more subtle semantic vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. And this work raises this fundamental question, I think, which is if such seemingly minor modifications can mislead these powerful AI systems, what other more subtle or hidden vulnerabilities might exist? And how can we really ensure the reliable and safe deployment of these technologies as they continue to become more intertwined with our lives? It's a crucial area of ongoing research, and this particular study really provides valuable insights into the types of weaknesses we need to be aware of and actively work to address if we want to build truly robust AI.
So much to think about. And that wraps up this episode of The Deep Dive. Until next time, keep learning and stay curious.
Thanks for having me. It was a fascinating
It
discussion.
was great having you.